2020 is all set to bid us goodbye. It has been an unprecedented year, a historical year, a not so easy to forget in a lifetime kind of a year. But other than the effects of coronavirus, be it the lockdown, social distancing, masks, PPE kits, the world pretty much was as eventful as any other year. Sounds unbelievable, right? That's the reason why we bring you 10 stories in the next 1 hour that you might have missed because you were so overwhelmed with COVID-19. This year is the third time in history that the United States of America's president got impeached. Also, Vladimir Putin has been elected to remain in power till the year 2036. France suffered the worst terror attacks and Iran almost went to war with the United States of America. Take a look.
US President Donald Trump would never forget 2020. Not only the pandemic, but also it was the year that marked the end of his presidency.
Guilty. Ms. Rosen.
The very first month of the year set the mood of political challenge the US president was to face throughout. The Senate trial for his impeachment started in January. It was a spillover from the previous year. In December 2019, Donald Trump became only the third US president to be impeached, following Bill Clinton in 1998 and Andrew Johnson in 1868. And like the other two, Trump remained in office after a Senate trial ended in acquittal on charges brought by the House of Representatives. The Democratic-led House accused him of abuse of power and obstruction of justice.
Donald J. Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in that, using the powers of his high office, President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 United States presidential election.
President Donald Trump received unstinting support and virtually no criticism from fellow Republicans in Congress, even as he defied political norms.
Everything was perfect, and they impeach. It's totally partisan. We're doing an incredible job. And for absolutely no reason, I got impeached. It's a disgrace and it's a hoax.
On 5th of February, US President Donald Trump was acquitted in the Senate impeachment trial.
You could take that home, honey. Maybe we'll frame it. It's the only good headline I've ever had in the Washington Post.
9 months later, he stood before the US voters asking for a second term. In the run-up to the presidential election, criticized at home for failure to stem the Black Lives Matter movement and the pandemic, President Trump depended on foreign diplomatic engagements to add shine to his candidacy. In August, the US brokered a deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, marking a new era in the region's troubled history. Soon Bahrain joined and the Abraham Accord became US President's new armor against the growing popularity of his Democratic adversary, Joe Biden. As the race to the White House started to get closer, President Donald Trump became more brazen than before.
I easily win.
The California fire that raged on across the state for days, destroying about 4 million acres of land, the president refused to accept the impact of climate change.
So I think one area of mutual agreement and priority is vegetation management. But I think we want to work with you to really recognize the changing climate and what it means to our forests and actually work together with that science. That science is going to be key, because if we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay. It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Hey, well, I don't think science knows, actually.
President Trump tried to dance his way to a second term, but the vote counts indicated a different ending to the story.
Good evening. I'd like to provide the American people with an update on our efforts to protect the integrity of our very important 2020 election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly.
Donald Trump launched legal battles to challenge the results, But one by one, the cases fell through, and the Electoral College confirmed that Joe Biden was going to the White House, not Trump.
The people of this nation have spoken. They've delivered us a clear victory, a convincing victory, a victory for we the people. We've won with the most votes ever cast on a presidential ticket in the history of the nation.
Guilty.
A year that started with an impeachment trial ended in an electoral defeat for Donald Trump. 2020 meant Trump was out. In the very first week of 2020, relations between Iran and the US flared up to dangerous levels to set the mood for the rest of the year. US assassinated Iran's General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Foreign Legions and Iran's most powerful figure after its supreme leader, in a drone strike near Baghdad airport.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him.
Iran called for revenge.
انتقامی از آنها خواهیم گرفت که روزشون را تبدیل به شام سیاه خواهد کرد.
Iran launched an attack on the US-led forces in Iraq. On 8th of January, the US military said that Iran fired more than a dozen ballistic missiles from Iranian territory against at least 2 Iraqi military bases hosting US-led coalition personnel.
حالا یه سیلی دیشب به اینها زده شد. این مسئله دیگری است.
US President Trump backtracked and offered not to use further force.
As long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well.
Though there was no casualty on American side, the repercussion of the Iranian missile attack had graver consequences. A Ukrainian International Airlines passenger plane crashed in Iran on the same day of the missile attack, killing all 176 aboard. The Boeing 737-800, en route to Kyiv and carrying mostly Iranians and Iranian Canadians, came down hours after Iran fired missiles at bases housing US forces in Iraq. There were speculations that the plane may have been hit by the Iranian missile. US fueled the speculations further, though Iran denied any such possibility.
It was flying in a pretty rough neighborhood, and somebody could have made a mistake. Some people say it was mechanical. I personally don't think that's even a question, personally. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't want to get, that's up to them. At some point, they'll release the black box. Ideally, they'd get it to Boeing, but if they gave it to France or if they gave it to some other country, that would be okay too. I think, ideally that will be released. I have a feeling that it's just something very terrible happened. Very devastating.
سازمان افغان کشوری اجازه نداره گمان زنی کنه. باید مطمئن بشیم به اون صحبتی که میکنیم. ما علت وقوع هنوز برای ما نمیتونه مشخص بشه، ولی همونطور اشاره کردیم قطعا موشکی با اون برخورد نشده، ولی اینکه علت آتش سوزی و عاملش چی بود اینو باید دنبال بکنیم.
But 3 days after the missile strike and an early denial, Iran confirmed that it did shoot down the plane.
حادثه دلخراش سرنگونی هواپیمای مسافربری خطوط هوایی اوکراین رو بنده در غرب کشور بعد از اجرای عملیات ضربات موشکی بر علیه پایگاه‌های امریکا شنیدم و موقعی که اطمینان پیدا کردم که این اتفاق افتاده واقعا آرزوی مرگ کردم برای خودم که ای کاش می‌مردم و چنین حادثه‌ای رو شاهد نبودم. ما یک عمر خودمون رو پیشمرگ مردم کردیم و امروز هم آبرومون رو با خداوند متعال معامله می‌کنیم و در این شرایط سخت در مقابل این دوربین‌ها ظاهر شدیم که توضیح بدیم. من همین ابتدا عرض بکنم.
With that came an uncomfortable lull in the Iranian-US relation. But not for long. 9 months later, on 20th of September, the United States unilaterally declared that all United Nations penalties against Iran has been restored. These penalties were eased under the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran dismissed US efforts to restore all UN sanctions. But the year was not over yet. On 27th November, Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed in the outskirts of Tehran by a remote-controlled weapon. Iran claimed Israel was behind the assassination. While Iranian parliament and people vowed revenge, their supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, showed restraint. The region remained volatile and awaits Iranian backlash.
"2020 will be known as the landmark year for Vladimir Putin. Russian voters paved the way for President Vladimir Putin to stay in power till 2036. They voted overwhelmingly for a package of constitutional changes that also included boost to pensions. Official results published on 2nd July showed that nearly 78% of voters had approved the changes.
Я хочу обратиться со словами благодарности гражданам России. Хочу сказать спасибо вам большое за поддержку и доверие.
But soon, protests against the vote took place in Moscow and St. Petersburg. As critics said, the poll was flawed by serious irregularities. Russian polling and government authorities denied the allegations. The opposition leader, described in the Western media as the man Vladimir Putin fears most, called the vote a coup and a violation of constitution. A month and a half later, on 20th August, Alexei Navalny fell seriously ill during a flight from Tomsk to Moscow. The flight had to make an emergency landing and he was rushed to hospital. It was suspected that Navalny had been poisoned. Soon after, Navalny was airlifted to Germany for treatment, where the poisoning was confirmed.
Alexei Nawalny wurde Opfer eines Angriffs mit einem chemischen Nervenkampfstoff der Novichok-Gruppe. Dieses Gift lässt sich zweifelsfrei in den Proben nachweisen. Damit ist sicher, Alexei Nawalny ist Opfer eines Verbrechens. Er sollte zum Schweigen gebracht werden Und ich verurteile das auch im Namen der ganzen Bundesregierung auf das Allerschärfste.
Kremlin denied all the allegations and said these were aimed at defaming the political leadership of Russia. Most European countries and America sided with the German claim that Alexei Navalny is the victim of a murder attempt using the nerve agent Novichok. Facing condemnation by the West, Vladimir Putin found golden reprieve as clashes broke out overnight in Nagorno-Karabakh. The decades-old conflict between the former republics of the USSR, Armenia and Azerbaijan is over who controls the enclave. As armed clashes began between the neighbors, Russia was prompt to intervene, but it took more than a month to broker a ceasefire between the two. On 10th November, Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a deal to end the military conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Vladimir Putin brokered the peace deal, which saw heavy Russian troop deployment in the enclave to maintain the ceasefire. And then Navalny came back to haunt Putin once again as the year was about to close. A joint media inquiry pieced together how a Russia Federal Security Service FSB unit followed Navalny throughout his trip to Siberia that he undertook in August 2020. The investigation found that 2 teams of 5 or 6 agents were deployed on Navalny's Siberian trip, and this included people who specialized in toxins and nerve agents. Russian authorities chose to remain quiet and not respond to the allegations. 2021 will see Alexei Navalny back in Russia before the parliamentary elections. For the time being, he remains in Germany, recovering from his near-death experience.
"2020 was a year that France would hardly be able to forget. It was a year that questioned its DNA of freedom of expression and its struggle with combating terror." In July 2020, 15 months after Notre Dame Cathedral was set on fire, the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul at Nantes in western France faced a similar incident of arson. The blaze was put out within hours, but the centuries-old Gothic church suffered serious damage. A Rwandan asylum seeker living in France for the past 7 years claimed responsibility. Within 2 months of the cathedral fire, another storm began to brew over French sky. To mark the Charlie Hebdo attack trial beginning, the magazine reran the controversial Prophet Muhammad cartoons in September. These cartoons had been the cause of the attack in 2015 on the magazine's office, which saw the killing of 12 people, including its main cartoonist. 2 people stormed the Paris offices of Charlie Hebdo and sprayed the building with automatic gunfire. The brothers and a third gunman who killed 5 people in the 48 hours that followed Charlie Hebdo attack were shot dead by police. But 14 of their alleged accomplices were put on trial that began in September 2020, opening old wounds. The French president reconfirmed his commitment to freedom of expression.
Je pense qu'un président de la République en France n'a jamais à qualifier le choix éditorial d'un journaliste ou d'une rédaction. Jamais. Parce qu'il y a une liberté de la presse à laquelle vous tenez à juste titre profondément.
Before September could end, the backlash of the rerunning of controversial cartoons was felt. A man armed with a meat cleaver attacked and wounded 2 people who had stepped out for a cigarette in front of the Paris office building, which had housed the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo 5 years ago. Police detained the man suspected of carrying out the attack. The suspected attacker is said to be from Pakistan. Within 20 days of the attack, a French history teacher, Samuel Paty, was beheaded in a Paris suburb on October 16th by an angry radical of the Chechen region. He wanted to avenge the teacher's use of cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in a class on freedom of expression. In the following days, thousands of people gathered across France to support teachers and defend freedom of expression. French President Macron praised the slain teacher in a nationally televised memorial service. Samuel Paty, the slain teacher, was posthumously awarded the Légion d'honneur, France's highest decoration.
Samuel Paty est devenu vendredi le visage de la République, de notre volonté de briser les terroristes, de réduire les islamistes, de vivre comme une communauté de citoyens libres dans notre pays, le visage de notre détermination à comprendre, à apprendre, à continuer d'enseigner, à être libre.
While the Muslims in the Paris suburb mosque held prayers to pay homage to the slain teacher, a row about the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad re-emerged after French media published the caricatures of the Prophet. These were also projected on some buildings following the beheading of Samuel Paty. Protests erupted in different parts of the world and French flags and effigies of French president were burnt. Soon after Samuel Paty's beheading, a knife-wielding man said to be of Tunisian origin beheaded a woman and killed 2 other people in a church in the French city of Nice on October 29th.
On vient d'apprendre à la télévision que notre sacristain a été assassiné, tué. C'est un choc. Oh mon Seigneur.
Security alert was raised to the highest level across France after the attack. By December, a new law got drafted to arm France against Islamist radicalism. And one of the first tasks that faces the French Parliament in the new year will be to debate this draft and decide on whether it becomes a law or not. 2020 ended with France witnessing an increased level of intolerance towards migrants and asylum seekers. 2020 saw the French becoming insular and eyeing foreigners on their soil with suspicion.
2020 in many ways has been a year of protests when people across Europe, Asia or Africa stood up and protested against the ruling power, defying their guns, muscle power or even economic might. These are those fearless brave who marched for democratic rights and reforms. Interestingly, this is also a year when some members of the royal family decided to be financially independent, and scientists have found life beyond Earth. Take a look.
On 10th of August 2020, it was declared that President Alexander Lukashenko had won a landslide re-election victory in Belarus. But as soon as the results were declared, Belarusians took to the streets protesting. Bloody clashes between riot police and thousands of protesters marked Lukashenko's victory as people claimed that the polls were rigged.
Лукашенко Александр Григорьевич, за него проголосовало 4 652 423 или 80,23%. Тихановская Светлана Георгиевна, за нее проголосовало 574 312 человек или почти 10%, 9,90%.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a former teacher and human rights activist, emerged to become President Lukashenko's main rival. Her husband, businessman and activist Serhiy Tikhanovsky, had been the original candidate and had used his popular YouTube channel to criticize the regime of President Alexander Lukashenko and drum up support for the opposition. After 26 years of uninterrupted power, Lukashenko began to face increasing opposition from people in the run-up to the presidential polls in 2020. Many of those who criticized his government, including Serhiy, were jailed or taken into custody, which meant that potential opposition candidates could not make it to the ballots. 38-year-old Svetlana then stepped in in place of her husband and became the face of the opposition to President Lukashenko and stood as his main challenger in the August polls. Fearing for her safety, Svetlana then fled Belarus soon after the elections and appealed to the European Union and the international community to intervene.
Standing for human rights and democracy is not interference. And we want our country to be free of dictatorship, free of violence.
Every weekend since the 10th of August, Belarusians have been marching on the streets of the capital Minsk as well as other cities and towns. The police have been accused of using brutal force to quell these demonstrations as thousands of protesters have been jailed. Ignoring the protest, Lukashenko was sworn in for a new term on the 23rd of September. Svetlana denounced Lukashenko's sixth term swearing in from exile in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius.
Эта так называемая инаугурация, конечно же, фарс. На самом деле, сегодня Лукашенко просто ушел на пенсию. Это значит, что его приказы силовым структурам больше не легитимны, а значит, не подлежат исполнению. Я, Светлана Тихановская, являюсь единственным лидером, который был избран белорусским народом. И наша задача сейчас вместе построить новую Беларусь.
While the United States and European Union have not officially recognized President Lukashenko's claimed victory, Russian President Vladimir Putin was quick to congratulate his Belarusian counterpart on the day of his victory itself.
4th November, the world got to know that Ethiopia has begun military operations within its territory in Tigray. Ethiopian Prime Minister claimed that the country's army was attacked by the rebels of Tigray's political front, TPLF.
ላለፉት 20 ዓመታት በቀበሮ ምሽግ ውስጥ በመሆን ሀገሬ ወገኔ ህዝቤ ብሎ በብዙ ሺዎች መስዋዕትነት ከፍሎ ቆስሎ ደምቶ ደክሞ ሀገሩንና ህዝቡን የታደገው የሀገር መከላከያ ሰራዊት ዛሬ ምሽት ከመቀሌ ጀምሮ በበርካታ ስፍራዎች በካሃዲ ኃይሎች እና ባደራጁት ኃይል ጥቃት ተፈጽሞበታል።
The Prime Minister identified Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, as traitors. TPLF is the only party that has refused to join the Prosperity Party formed last year by the Prime Minister. Prosperity Party replaced the coalition of 4 parties that has ruled Ethiopia for the last 30 years. When Abiy Ahmed postponed Ethiopia's election first to September and then to 2021 due to the raging COVID pandemic, TPLF refused to abide by it and went ahead with regional elections in Tigray in September. Abiy Ahmed's federal government called it illegal. A tussle of power demonstration over the northwestern province of Tigray started that culminated in a military conflict in November. On 21st November, Ethiopian troops took full control of Tigray's capital. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed lauded his troops and declared victory over the Tigray People's Liberation Front.
99% ታርጌት መተናል 99% ኮላተራል ዳሜጅ አልነበረው የሚያጠራጥር ሲሆን አንተኩስም ለምሳሌ ማታ አልተኮስንም ህፃናት ቢሞቱስ ብለን የኛ ስለሆነ በስፔሻል ፎርሱና በኤር ፎርስ ላይ የተፈጠረው ካፓሲቲ ጠላት አሲዩም የሚያደርገው ስላልነበረ ድሮንን የሚያስቡት ለቶክስ ብቻ ነው እኛ ግን ድሮን ምን ተጠቀም የነበረው 90% ለማየት ነው እንቅስቃሴያቸው ምናምናቸው
But in this month-long conflict, more than 30,000 Ethiopians fled to Sudan. The United Nations announced a $35 million emergency aid package for civilians caught up in the fight in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Of this, more than $10 million would be used to provide shelter, healthcare and drinking water for the Ethiopian refugees living in neighboring Sudan. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed visited Mekelle on 13th December and declared that Ethiopia is rebuilding Tigray and it will continue to do so in 2021. "2020 saw an increase in intensity among Thai people for political reforms. People's demonstrations started with the demand of the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. The protesters allege that Prime Minister Prayut, who as army chief in 2014 led a coup that ousted an elected government. He returned to power unfairly in the 2019 election because laws had been changed to favor a pro-military party. And then, by November, they demanded reforms in the government. People came out in thousands protesting in Thai capital Bangkok. They wrapped a large white cloth around Bangkok's Democracy Monument, on which they wrote messages to the government with their demands and their wishes for the future.
มาครั้งนี้ก็เพราะว่าอยากออกมาเรียกร้องอนาคตของพวกเราทุกคนเหมือนกันถ้ายังไม่ได้แบบที่เราเรียกร้องไปถ้ายังไม่ได้แบบที่เราต้องการก็จะออกมาอีกค่ะก็จะออกมาอีกเรื่อยๆกันนะคะ
Nearly 20 pro-democracy groups together call these series of rallies at Bangkok's Democracy Monument the Mob Fest. They want significant reforms in government. While protesters thronged the streets of Bangkok, Thai Parliament started to debate on the constitutional amendments. On 18th November, the Thai Parliament voted to move forward with two proposals on amending the constitution, but stopped short of backing a motion that included monarchical reform.
ที่เราต้องออกมาสู้ด้วยหัวจิตหัวใจเพราะผมเป็นนักการเมืองผมดูออกว่าอันเนี้ยรัฐธรรมนูญ60เนี่ยไม่ได้สร้างปัญหาแก้ปัญหาในอดีตและมันเป็นประโยชน์ต่อระบบการเมืองในระยะยาว
Clashes between the protesters and the police and royalists became more prevalent as the year came to an end. It has now resulted in the deployment of the military, riot police and mass arrests in Bangkok and across Thailand.
Dr. Isra Seblani was posing for her wedding photo at a square close to her wedding venue in Lebanon's capital city of Beirut on 4th August of 2020. Suddenly, a blast in the background could be heard and she was swept and blown away from where she stood. Smoke filled the streets around her. Another eyewitness captured the devastating blast that rocked Beirut in the afternoon of the fateful August day. A fire continued to blaze even 3 hours after the blast that struck the city shortly after 6 p.m. in the Beirut port area.
I'm good. What is it?
Aerial footage showed the city's port littered with debris and rubble after 2,750 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate, which had been stored in a port warehouse for 6 years without safety measures, ignited. Shockwaves of the blast smashed two building facades, sucked furniture out into streets, and shattered windows miles inland. Emergency workers dug through rubble across a swath of the city to rescue people and remove the dead. Over 170 people were killed in the blast. and more than 6,000 were injured. Up to 250,000 people were left without homes fit to live in. It was the most powerful blast to hit Beirut in years. Once the shock of the devastation sunk, scores of protesters took to the streets on 8th August. They asked for the resignation of the government for its negligence of allowing such huge hoarding of inflammable items without proper safety measures that led to this gigantic explosion. 2 days later, Lebanon's Prime Minister announced his government's resignation. President Michel Aoun accepted it, but asked Diab's government to stay as a caretaker until a new cabinet is formed. This statue was formed from broken glass and twisted metals that belonged to people's homes before the August 4th explosion. The girl, her arm raised, the wind whipping her hair away from her scarred face, has now become a symbol of Lebanon's tryst with 2020.
The first month of 2020 started with a sensational development from within the British royalty. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and wife Meghan Markle announced their decision to step down as senior royals. It was a stunning break from tradition that underscored the couple's wish to forge a new path for royals in the modern world.
They've taken this move as a result of months and months of unhappiness in their royal lives. You know, we've known for some time that they've been unhappy with the way they've been perceived by the media, and it has been pretty toxic at times. You know, they've had a lot of flack both from the press, from the tabloids, and from sections of the public as well through social media.
A statement issued in early January through Buckingham Palace detailed Harry and Meghan's plan to become financially independent and balance their time between the United Kingdom and North America. For their last official engagement, they joined Queen Elizabeth and other members of the Britain's royal family for the annual Commonwealth Day service on 9th March.
Hello. Will you miss Harry and Meghan?
Of course. While they were missed in the UK, they remained in news in their new roles for the rest of the year. Harry and Meghan, who are already living in Canada, moved to California soon after, and later announced a production deal with Netflix. The couple made video appearances throughout the pandemic for various events and media outlets, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and encouraging people to vote. Their actions even irked the US President Donald Trump.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle chimed in on the US election and essentially encouraged people to vote for Joe Biden. I want to get your reaction to that.
I'm not a fan of hers. And I would say this, and she probably has heard that, but I wish a lot of luck to Harry, because he's going to need it.
It was a year of struggle for the young royal couple, trying to readjust to their new role as commoners. At the end of November, the Duchess Meghan Markle wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times in which she spoke about the miscarriage she suffered earlier this year in July.
Space was in demand in 2020.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon, go NASA, go!
The Great Vacuum provided moments of hope and glory in an otherwise difficult and stressful year. Most high-priority missions across the world remained on track despite lockdowns and social distancing. SpaceX, the private space exploration company of billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk, launched 2 Americans into orbit from Florida on 30th May 2020.
Go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Dog!
And with that, SpaceX became the first private company to put people into space.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
An achievement previously claimed by just 3 global superpower countries. In November, 4 more astronauts rode a SpaceX Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. 3 weeks later, SpaceX launched its biggest cargo shipment yet to the space station for NASA. In September 2020, scientists detected phosphine gas in the harshly acidic clouds of Venus. The discovery indicates a tantalizing possibility that microbes may inhabit Earth's inhospitable neighbor and that there could be potential life beyond Earth.
The key to what we found is the presence of phosphine gas in the clouds of Venus. This is very unexpected because phosphine is a phosphorus atom and 3 hydrogen atoms, and there's really very little hydrogen available in the atmosphere. So we think something is a process that's making it, and one of the possibilities is it's small floating organisms. And the reason we think that is because there are small bacteria on Earth that do actually make phosphine.
As the year was about to end, China set its sight on the moon with the landing of its spacecraft Chang'e 5 and then launching off the lunar surface in December. It brought back the first moon rocks collected for return to Earth since the 1970s. And in a daring mission, Japan's spacecraft Hayabusa 2 brought back dust from asteroid Ryugu.
If a year plagued by pandemic could not dampen the human spirit and its aspirations, or the determination to stay tuned to reality, then it can easily be called a good year. 2020 has taught us that everything is possible, and it is time to look to a new year and hope for a better future. With that, it's time to slip into a short break. On the other side, news and updates continue. Stay tuned to India Today.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.